She was City Farmer's first head gardener in 1982. This is a demonstration garden for sustainable practices in Kitsilano, which just celebrated its 40th anniversary. It's a beautiful place. In the 1980s, Catherine began to create multimedia artistic works that expressed her increasing knowledge of plants. Her varied and growing interests led her to embark upon a lifelong research project on the role of women in the development of horticulture. Catherine has dedicated herself to cultivating and foraging plant materials to create wonderful environmental artworks. In the past few years, she has tended and processed indigo in her own garden and at the Means of Production Garden in East Vancouver, where she also mentored a younger artist. Working with indigo has led her to experiment with pigments, and she's using them in a new series of cast paper sculptures. Catherine is my neighbor, and I met her through the 2 Block Diet Club we started a few years back. And I'm so lucky to have her close by and be able to witness her prowess as a gardener and as an artist. She is a master at growing brassicas, something which is often the test of a truly accomplished gardener. And her passion for plants continually inspires me. Her garden functions as so many things: an outdoor studio, a classroom, and a boon to pollinators. I love seeing Catherine in her garden, and our chats over the fence are a very important part of my life. All right, Catherine, take it away.
What would you like me to talk about, Lori?
Let's start from the beginning. Now, Elisa has some images she wanted to put up and share, so here you go on your screen.
Okay, well, this is an image that I did. I did a series about my childhood pertaining to gardens mostly. I grew up in the Hollywood Hills and Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, and I used to wander both by myself and with some other kids. And just this is an image of me standing at a fence on a garbage can looking at this garden. I must have been about 10 or 11, and there was this chandelier hanging from a fir tree, and there was white pebbles and some garden furniture, and I was just intrigued with it. It was like really small and really beautiful. And there were a lot of gardens like that that were unique. Each one was unique, and they weren't necessarily fancy or wealthy people's gardens. They were just individuals, but this one I really liked, and I got to meet the people that lived there and became friends with them. So, and before that, my grandparents had a garden that really influenced me here in Vancouver over on Hull Street. It was just torn down this past winter, but it was there as part of my family for 80 years. And my grandparents bought it in 1940, and it had, an apple orchard, every kind of berry, a greenhouse, a huge vegetable garden. And I think that was the start of my love of gardens. Hello?
Hiya. So now you had some other images there too. Elisa, do you want to switch to the next image?
Hello, are you guys still there?
Yeah. Can you show the next image? It was some kind of critter on a fence. Do you want to talk about that, Catherine?
Yeah, it flashed by a second ago. It was a garden in Laurel Canyon that had every kind of citrus tree imaginable and no fence around it. And we used to go in and help ourselves. And one thing about living in Laurel Canyon is nobody ever came out and stopped us. I mean, either people weren't home or they didn't care. And that it had limes, grapefruit, everything. And so I was in there one day pulling a lemon off a tree and started to pick, noticed this huge, well, at the time, I didn't know what it was, but I just ran home and never went to that garden again. But I did continue to play across the street. So when I went to recreate this, I tried to think, and it was huge. So I painted it as an iguana, but it could have been another kind of huge lizard. I don't know.
Wow, that's really cool. And the next image, Lisa? There we go.
Okay, well, this is just something from one of my interests. This is a floating garden, 2 floating gardens, and Amaranth. I've done a lot of work with Amaranth, both growing it, painting it, and researching it. And the floating gardens in Mexico just intrigue me. I think they're one of the most ingenious gardening methods ever, because they're dredging things up from the lake and dumping that on top of the beds. So they're constantly feeding the beds, and they can grow, all year, one crop after another. And I always was really taken with that.
Fantastic. And then the next slide.
Oh, this is a pen and ink drawing I finished 2 days ago. It's a panorama of my garden. I was standing in my garden a few months ago thinking somebody should do a panorama of my garden. And then I realized the only person really was going to do that was me. So I started in late March and just finished it a couple days ago, and haven't really done much in pen and ink. And I did this freehand, and yeah.
It's beautiful. What's your favorite part of your garden?
Oh, I don't have a favorite part. I like all of it. My irises are blooming right now, and I really like irises, so I'm happy with them right now. And this I did after I did this big research project about horticulture. And I spent 25 years on that. Then I decided I wanted to go back to painting, which is what I'd started doing when I went to art school. And so I had to sort of reteach myself to paint. And this was one of the paintings I did, like as a study to get.
Beautiful.
And this, like Lori said, have been growing and processing indigo last, I think, 6 years. So this is a painting of a cabbage in my garden, which I first, do the drawing, and then this is painted on cotton, which I cured with soy milk, and then I mix the paints with soy milk because that's the bump. So this was never intended to, it was intended, I think, when I did it, to go on a lantern, but it ended up being framed as part of a show. And so I'll have to do another one.
Beautiful. And how has your garden helped you through this current crisis that we're going through, or has it?
Oh, my garden helps me through everything. And like I've always thought of my garden as like one of my best friends. I've had the same garden for 41 years. I've spent so much time out there. And so during this pandemic, I've gone back to growing more vegetables. I've been growing dog plants a lot, but this year I'm going back to growing more vegetables. So I've been working on that a lot. And I'm just glad to have the space. And I use my garden, like Lori said, as a studio. So now that it's warming up, I started making paper out there, and pretty soon I'll make a vat. And so I'm out there a lot, and I really like it. And I have lots of birds, lots of bees, and a lot of people come by and talk to me, like Lori said, over the fence. So it hasn't been lonely because I have people always talk to me when I'm out there.
That's great.
In fact, when we bought this house, the lady that lived here before said to me, "You'll never be lonely because you're out in the garden and people always talk to you." And that's true.
And what do you see happening in your future? How do you envision what's going to happen next
My future?
with your garden?
Well, It's going, I've been planting more and more perennials in the last 10 years because I'm 71 and, my knees are going and, it's not as physically easy. It's getting to be challenging. So, I just called a friend today to she's going to, you know, help me more than I used to. I think I'll just carry on and just I don't see another garden in my future. I mean, this is it, right? This is my garden and I'm going
And
to
what do
stay
you
with it
see?
till I can't. Hmm. Do I see what?
And how about the future of gardening in general? How do you see it changing? Because there's all these people now that have joined in and are learning.
Well, I encourage everybody to garden as much as they can. I mean, with the threat of food shortages and food chains being breaking down. I mean, about these things and take it into their own hands and plant more and garden as much as they can before you know growing a lot of food. It's amazing you can grow it. One of my favorite um, future things and because of the embargoes from the states, like everybody grows food, and they showed this lawyer growing corn in plastic milk jugs and hanging it on on a fence, because for space issues. So I think to get like really creative, use everything you can to plant in, and just try your best, because gardening is not as hard as people think. You know. So I'd encourage people, get busy because we're going to need all the food we can get. That's my opinion.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Catherine. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, that's it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yay, we got the technology working. Fantastic. All right, so next up on deck, we have Lori Schneider. Lori Schneider is an Indigenous herbalist and educator with a deep knowledge of edible and medicinal plants. A descendant from the Tsutsina, Sarsi, Nakota, Assiniboine, Cree, Nipissing, and Anishinaabe Ojibwe people, with a Métis blend of First Nations people with Scottish, French, and Celtic ancestry. Born and raised in Squamish, British Columbia, Lori spent her childhood playing in the forest. From a young age, she has been learning about plants and later studied herbalism, aromatherapy, and permaculture. Since 2013, Lori has been bringing forth her First Nations perspective of wild, edible, and medicinal plants to help people reconnect to the wisdom of Mother Earth. I met Lori through Community Connections many years ago when our children were much younger. Lori is currently the caretaker of the Moberly Arts and Cultural Center's Community Garden and Medicine Wheel Garden. This was a project that was started by Cindy Schwelos and has gradually expanded under my influence and now Lori's loving stewardship. Lori was on the original team of designers for the Medicine Wheel Garden. Her relationship with plants runs deep and connects on a cellular level with her body. She vibrates with plant wisdom and energy. She inspires me in deep and lasting ways. Lori is a generous teacher, and I have tasted many of her tasty jams and infusions. My favorite is her rose petal honey. All right, Lori, take it away.
My friends. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that, Lori. That's so beautiful. And Catherine, oh my goodness, your paintings are exquisite, and how lucky you were that, running through the Laurel Canyon hills and finding all that incredible, diverse, beautiful food that probably is not there anymore. So my friends, I figured out I don't somehow I can't get the camera on, but what I can do is I just took a picture of my painting and Lori has me inspired to, I think this one, it might be a little crooked, but I think, oh, I saw you guys for just a moment. Here, taking a breath.
Nice, you did it.
I did. But here's my painting. I've appreciated this time as I've been starting to play in a way that I've never played before. And then when Lori asked me to come and join you all tonight, like, oh, okay, I'm gonna paint a painting. And this is actually looking up the hill. It was a slight hill backyard. So there was a couple cherry trees. There was the Kwanzaa flower tree and lilac bush. And then at the top of this slight incline was Dad's dahlias. So that's what I'm kind of emulating there. And there was a little bit of a rock pathway going up. And then something just inspired me to paint this sort of like bright yellow sun, but really I recognize it more as my parents. Both my parents have now passed, and I really look at it more as, you know, this is my mom and dad here in the garden, in this representation of this, you know, time in my past. And I have to, I do not have any memories of being in the garden with my father at all. In fact, I was much older. I may have been in my 20s. Actually, discovered that it was my dad who did the growing of the food in the back of our yard. And this is up in, and prior to the garden coming in, we had, you know, stags, bears, raccoons, skunks, you know, it was forest. That's what it was in our backyard. So I'm really grateful for that I had that experience, you know, playing with trees and grasshoppers and garter snakes. So
Wow.
that's, yeah, going back into my past. And thank you, Lori,
Nice.
for inspiring me to paint.
It's beautiful.
Thanks. Thanks. Okay, so I have another image. So let me show you the next one because I feel,
All
oh,
right.
yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying something. Okay. Share content. And I want to take you to my present garden, which is the one that Lori was describing. And hopefully I can show you a couple images.
Yes.
I am so grateful for this garden. And what's happened? I'm sorry.
Hey, what is that?
Oh, just somebody in the background. So up at Moberly at Prince Albert in 62, this beautiful garden that Lori Weidenhammer had the, you know, vision to take the lawn out, just the grass, and put in 4 quadrants showcasing our native plants here on the coast. And then 5 garden beds, and then later pollinate area as well. And I'm going to show you, I want to show you what I've just done recently. And, you know, it's interesting how I personally feel that when I put my hands in the earth and I'm playing, that I feel that I get told what to do. And so last fall, with the help of many hands, we built, not me, but we all did it together. I think it's this one I like. Decided to cut down through this slope to help capture some of the water. So we dug out trenches and filled it up with bark mulch And what's beautiful about the bark mulch is it's going to help to capture that water to feed the beds. And I've just recently put in radishes, spinach, beets. I got found 3 full-grown blueberries, Oregon grape, Huscat, Haskap berries, raspberries, thornless blackberries, and some cut flowers. What else we can find here, since I'm going to just keep chatting here for a few minutes. So that was, amazing. And then what happened is, because I've been up there, as soon as this whole process started, my first inkling was I need to get to the garden and I need to start growing food. So here, there we go. So here's another image of the garden. And what you can see is a little bit of buttercup. So there will always be buttercup, which is an indicator plant that we've got water on the site. And maybe the following weekend, I'd like to make some flower essences with the beautiful flowers. You notice I have a bit of grass here right beside the garden bed, and this is to protect it from drying out from the sun and from the wind. So I have to manage that grass. Manage is not the word I like using. I have to be in relationship with the grass. So I'm always clipping it, making sure that I'm not dropping more seeds. And then on the left-hand side, we've got some beautiful viola and some wild plum. And what I'd let you know is you need both a male and a female of the wild plum to actually get a berry production. And you can't quite see it, but there is also some Saskatoon berries. I am loving this garden. So let me just show you one more image and tell you a few more things, and then we'll go into my future. Am I doing okay for time, Lori?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. What's another image I like? Actually, I'm going to show you this one because I'm just putting in the pictures. So you can, this was the circle in the background was mulch pile. And I recognized in the spring that this is really where I get the most sunlight. Last year, I planted the Three Sisters, and it wasn't so successful because it was under the tree a bit. And so I thought, okay, well, let's find a sunnier space. And, for any of you new gardeners, what I would let you know is that you will start doing things. You'll have lots of conversation, just like Catherine said, people her fence chatting with her. And some things you'll go, oh, that didn't work very well. But it's all okay because it's all part of the process. And I think that's really the piece. Gardening is a hands-on experience. Now, because with the pandemic happening, as soon as that happened, as I was mentioning earlier, I just had to go up to the garden. I just had to start growing food. I just had to put my hands in the earth, just ground myself as the kind of the chaos and the media and everything just sort of happening. And what happened is a lot of people, as time went by, started coming out of their homes and started walking around the park, which lent lent to have. So even though we didn't have a fence to separate us, I was letting everyone know that I'd been caretaking this garden, which none of them had come to before, that they were welcome to come for some free plants. So I try and put some in the garden. And for me to really get them to start thinking about growing food. And Catherine just touched on it. We need to have food sovereignty and food security here in Vancouver, in Richmond, all through the Fraser Valley. In fact, our whole country. Um, I, the thoughts and conversations that started to come up was recognizing, wow, we rely on other countries to feed us, and we totally have the ability to start growing our own food. You know that from the Victory Gardens during the war, and also we have a young emerging population that could be farmers if they so choose to be. So I think it's really an exciting time for us to think about, moving forward, what that can look like. And I might just put one more photo up there just because I kind of remember seeing one that I was like, oh, I really like that. That's pretty too. It had, oh, the calendula. I think it's this one. So, and just a couple more things, because even though personally, I always love to leave you with some information. So, with the bark mulch, which is holding the water, what's beautiful about that is the mycelium can come in through the garden, which is important for moving nutrients, because most of the plants, the black hawthorn, the rose, the salmon berry, are all in the ground, so they can all take care of each other and help to keep each other healthy. But something I just learned the other day is that Paul Stamens was sharing that when the mushrooms spore, so when they release all their spores, they attract, or insects are attracted to that as a food source. And what happened here at this beautiful garden is the garden came alive, not just with the plants and the bees and the butterflies. Dragonflies have been there. We have a resident hummingbird. The little birds come in. And then every once in a while, if you're lucky when you're there, you'll see the hawks come by looking for dinner. So, so even though, I don't like finding little bird feathers, another species is being fed. And part of that is because of the vision of, taking those, corners of parks and, taking out the grass and putting in most plants here, but there are medicines here, there are cut flowers, there are berries, food, vegetables. It's such an incredible, beautiful garden. So I really invite you to come up and for a picnic. Right behind the garden here at the far end of that picture is a beautiful daisy field, and you're surrounded by some incredible, beautiful trees, and it's just a magical space. The other thing I just want to quickly mention, I have to tell you, I'm not witnessing a lot of bees at the moment. And so be mindful that when you're designing your garden, that you're not digging up where native bees may have created their home, their nesting site. So be really, really mindful of design when you're planning those gardens. And Elisa, if you could show my future garden, I could just quickly talk about that. And we'll see how this works. We've got a little video here. Oh, darn, my friends, it wasn't quite the one, but that's okay. You can see this is a forest. I was in a forest recently, and just as I came into that edge of that forest, some of the trees had fallen. It created a meadow, and there was a huge diversity of plants. And really, my future garden is that we are taking the edges of parks, edges of forests, down the back alleys, the front boulevards of our homes. What else would I say? Oh, you know, community centers, schoolyards, that we are growing as many native plants as we can. And really one of the plants, or the plants that I really love to, you know, bring to people's consciousness, is our wild salal, Oregon grape, the wild plum, the Saskatoon berry, blueberries. This is, you know, these are important food sources. You know, nodding onion would be another one I'd love to see more. And really start to eat some of these superfoods. I would call them superfoods that really, you know, help to keep our bodies strong, our brains strong, and you know, help us to really connect deeper into almost the DNA of this land. You know, when we're eating out of the soil, it's going to really help our microbiome in our gut, which is the first level of defense for any pathogen, whether virus, bacteria. So we really want to make sure we have a strong gut health. And I often wonder how much that might actually change our relationship to the land when we're actually eating the plants, the berries, the medicines that have been, you know, growing here since time immemorial. And one last thing I just want to share, because I think this is also the future, is to be saving your seeds. And one of the things that I've been saving is dandelion seeds. As more and more conversation has taken off around dandelion, what an incredible food, easy to access, also an incredible pollinator plant. So, you know, make sure you're collecting some of the dandelion seeds. The heads are, some of them you'll find are closed. Just put them in a glass jar or paper bag. And then where you see more dandelion needs to be, please spread the seeds. So we all have
Sounds
beautiful
good.
food and medicine.
I love it. I was actually in Oak Meadows Park the other day, and it was very moving because a father was teaching his children how to blow the heads of the dandelions. So there you
Oh,
go. Those are our
beautiful.
future.
Yes.
That's lovely.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. That was lovely. It was lovely being back in that space in a virtual way, and I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for the inspiration, Lori.
Yes, and anyone, please come and visit. You know, I can always dig up plants for you like wild plum and yarrow and nodding onions and share those. So come and see me up at the garden. And thanks for inviting me, Lori. This is great. Can't wait to hear
Thank
you
you.
and Lois. All right.
Awesome. You're wonderful. Okay, we're on to Lois Clausen now. Lois is an artist, writer, and researcher based here in Vancouver, known for long-range projects that invite and engage participants in collective actions. Her projects address social and political concerns, deliberately facing ethical demand with social, aesthetic, and material methods. Clausen's artworks have been hosted by the Dunlop Gallery, Santa Fe Art Institute, the Glenbow Museum, the Western Front, Hub M3 at the University of Salford, Banff New Media Studio, and more. Lois is a 2020 Fulbright Scholar. Yay! Center for Inter-American Border Studies and Rubin Center for the Visual Arts, University of Texas, El Paso. So I met Lois at the Western Front, and I've been so privileged to collaborate with her on several projects, including our recent trip to Regina to do slow feminist actions at the Dunlop Gallery, which included a visit to the Regina Farmers Market, where I bought the garlic cloves that I have growing in my backyard. And I've been the lucky recipient of much of the bounty of Lois's garden. Her preserves and pickles have brightened many of our meals. Lois has a personal cookbook file with seasonal recipes that use the produce in her garden, which I admire and covet. Take it away, Lois.
Oh, thanks, Lori. Oh, it was so good to hear from both of you, or all three of you already. Catherine, I hadn't seen your paintings before. They're gorgeous. And it was so good to hear a little bit about the gardens that inspired you far away from here. And Lori, Lori Weidenhammer and I used to, or I used to meet Lori up at the Medicine Wheel Garden, and I haven't been there for a few years, so it was so good to see what it's like this year. And both of you talked a little bit about the conversations that are inspired by acts of urban gardening. So I want to follow on that a little bit. So I'm going to talk or show you a picture of a garden from my past. And it's not an actual garden, it's a picture of a garden. So this is a couple of pages from a German reader. And the book that the copy that I have says it was printed in 1952, but it must have been created earlier because other pages show wood stoves and steam engines. And the book is titled Bei uns daheim. It was a well-worn object in my childhood home. My parents read it to us so that we could learn the language of our immigrant grandparents. So it's not an actual garden, it's a representation of a garden, or for me, I might call it a garden imaginary. I think the illustration has had an important influence on my own gardening practices and spaces that I've created for growing food. So in the book, it describes the everyday lives, including hardships of early 20th century people in a little German Stadt, tiny little town, where the town is shown as circular. So you enter through an arched gate into a platz with a fountain in the center. Everything's surrounded by, or the platz is surrounded by the houses and the businesses, and behind the houses are these small fenced-in gardens that feed the families in the village. So in this set of pages, we see Zuza, the little girl, up at the top. She's showing her family's garden to her friend Rolf, and her younger brother and her doll are also looking in. So the garden is both formal and informal in its arrangement of garden beds, or beets, as they're called in German. The text says there's a bed for lettuce, a bed for spinach, a bed for peas, and one for beans. And then it says, flowers on the way, roses at the gate. In the evening, the father is always making or creating in the garden. That's a translation from Google Translate. So take it for what it is. I'm not sure about the translation of the word schafft. It's a conjugation of the verb erschaffen, to create or make or manage. So I take it that he's doing something creative as well as productive every evening in his garden. But maybe the father isn't the only creator. The charming center of the garden features evidence of Zuza. Her name is scripted in small stones framed by flowering plants. Zuza's flower bed labels the garden bed as a human, or at least the subject of human work and focus. It emphasizes the human and aesthetic values in gardening, making it a space that's adorable and desirable for the children as well and their families. So when I look at this picture today, I see it as a bit of a microcosm of European style agriculture. Each bed is a specific crop grown in a field, but the field is the scale of a child's body. It's a small form of property that's not communal. The commons or the wilds are outside of this town, and they're fenced out. And it's expressive of the family. Zuza is not just showing the garden to her friend and Rolf. We're all invited to admire the space from the outside looking in, a little bit like Catherine's painting at the beginning. Last weekend on CBC Radio's North by Northwest, I heard Haida artist Nicole Yagulanas talk about the differences between Western comic books and the genre of Haida manga, which he developed. So those of you in Vancouver probably know what I'm talking about. But just listening to him, I was thinking about this garden, and it made me look at this picture a little bit like a comic book, where there are these segments that are padded, they're lined up on the page with white spaces around them and in the margins. And Yagulanas talks about how in Western comics, each segment features the actions or concerns of specific individual characters. And then in contrast, his comic, Red, has no cells. Instead, the action hangs onto lines which curve and form pieces of a larger shape or character. And in Red, the pages can be cut from the binding and made into a wall mural. So the larger macro form of his story is a massive supernatural figure, which when you put it on the wall is something like the house front of a Haida house in a Haida village. So the contrast of Yagulanas' Red is just one way that helps me recognize the colonial form that's pictured in this garden from my past. And there's a picture of my garden, a little bit, or part of my garden, a little bit of the same vantage point. I'm looking at it from the second floor of our house. And it also has this, it's surrounded by fences. I recognize the imprint of the German house garden on the way I produce food in the tiny fence-bound spaces that surround my East Vancouver house, which is itself sitting on Coast Salish territory, as Laurie said in the introduction. So on this yard, I've transformed all of the available spaces on the property and on the city-owned meridian that is in front of the house and in front of the neighbor's house. All of it is turned into beds for pollinator-friendly plants and food-growing plants. And here's some of the beds in the backyard. Some of them have vertical elements owing to the extreme elevation change in our lot. And like the father in the little book, nearly every evening I also create in the garden. Schaff immer Garten. Before I moved to this lot where there is a little bit of space to garden, make around the house and garage, I made a couple of artworks that explored the problematics of micro garden plots in urban spaces, which is something we're really used to in Vancouver. So both the projects I'm going to talk about were something that was connected with Laurie Weidenhammer in a way. So these sort of lovingly represent the start of our work together, I think. In 2008, I made this Super 8 film about an unassigned traffic circle in Vancouver, and this was during the civic workers' strike in the city. At that time, I didn't have place to garden, and I couldn't stand to see this new traffic circle sit unattended for the season. So I tried to make a field of sweet peas, hoping that the legumes would add some nitrogen to the sterile dirt that had been dumped in before the strike began. The film is an homage to the Canadian filmmaker Joyce Wieland, and it uses her method of focusing the image through an extra iris on the camera made from a rolled up piece of paper at the end of the camera lens. In the film, Laurie joins me for an afternoon wine and cheese in the traffic circle, which at that point is filled with flowering sweet peas. Also in 2008, Laurie and I installed a plant sale at Cornerstone Projects. And some of you might remember that for a while that little corner store was an art space that Christina Lee Podesva and Sophie Brodovich and others were running. And it's now the coffee shop and market called Le Marché Saint-Georges in East Vancouver. But for that weekend or something, Laurie and I brought in all kinds of artworks that sort of served as a plant sale. And my piece was titled X Garden Box, and it was a whole pile of mini garden plots made inside of electronics packaging boxes, cardboard boxes, styrofoam forms, all became containers for gardening. And these were objects that had accumulated in the crawl space of our house. At the time, I was a very frustrated parent trying to process a kind of heartbreak that was part of raising children who preferred Xbox to gardening and pretty much to everything else, including eating and sleeping. And so the problems of recycling our family's waste were only part of the issues that I was earnestly trying to resolve in life and art. So both of these actions as artworks reflected on the needs of urban people, children included, to understand soil restoration, pollinator environments, and survival, including food production. But my artworks, you might note, but in these artworks, you might notice that there's a kind of futility which reflects how frustrated I was at the time. Okay, so that's the past. And so for a present garden, it's another one that inspires me. And this is another artist project that's kind of similar to some of the work that Laurie has done over the years. It's called Seed Broadcast, and you can look it up easily. I think it's seedbroadcast.org. It's a multifaceted art project, a practice really, by US-based artists Jeanette Hartman and Chrissy Orr. In 2012, they refurbished this bread delivery truck and made it into a mobile event space and traveled to seed swaps, libraries, community events to collect and broadcast stories about seeds and local food production. The project continues through a printed broadsheet journal, a website, and other artworks and events. The aim of their work is to deepen the relationship people have to sustainable production of food, particularly in New Mexico, through storytelling and art. There's a video on their website called A Letter from Seed Broadcaster. And I'll just quote a couple lines from it. They say, "What are seed stories? Seed stories are difficult to locate as specific subjects. Like seeds, they're entangled in a meshwork of cycles and interconnections across history, pollinating the thoughts and memories of our everyday fare. They're connected to the people who enact them, yet they reach out and touch others in the most unexpected ways. Like seeds that are shared at libraries and swaps, seed stories are not necessarily stories from the past. They're stories right now. They are each of us as we practice what it means to be 21st century cultivators of vitality through the seeds we share and plant." I met Chrissy Orr for the first time this March, at the very beginning of March. I visited her with Yoko Inoue, who's in the foreground of this picture, and Chrissy's in the background. And we're at Chrissy's farm on the Rio Grande in just north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And here we're helping Chrissy plant the very first rows of early greens in her greenhouse. The farm is irrigated using the acequia system that has developed in New Mexico over centuries by both the Spanish settlers and the resident indigenous farmers. It's a community-based system of agriculture and governance and water. It's mostly about the water distribution. And sadly, it's often under threat by suburban and urban developments and from water pollution in the region. The Seed Broadcast Art Project that's grown from this way of gardening emphasizes the relationship of the crops to the people who propagate them and who are fed by them. It's relational and interconnected. As the video puts it, the people are entangled in a meshwork of cycles and interconnections across history, the seeds pollinating the thoughts and memories of our everyday fare. In my own garden, I often plant the three sisters that Laurie was talking about, the beans, corn, and squash together, which is from an indigenous method that's found throughout the Americas, Canada included. I also treasure the immigrant plants and stories that I've collected and learned about from neighbors, and as well as my own ancestors. And I treasure the indigenous plants that a lot of them in my yard came from Richmond. And Elisa Yan was part of organizing this amazing Canada 150 display of indigenous plants. And then they later sold them for $1.50. So the spaces around this neighborhood have really benefited from that. Yeah, and I share these stories to inspire others to grow food and enjoy the food that I serve in my house and with my friends. Okay, now for a future garden, I want to bring another sort of representation of a garden, or a couple of gardens that are seen in the Korean film from 2009 called Castaway on the Moon, directed by Hae-Jun Lee. The film offers us a view into an abject urban space. An abject urbanism is a term that I'm borrowing and really dislocating. It's not really exactly what was meant by it, but it kind of works here. It's from the Mexican writer Sergio González Rodriguez, who used it to describe biopolitical power in inhospitable cities. Rodriguez used the term to describe cities housing spaces like maquiladoras and immigration detention facilities where the power of the state is realized through the bodies of the people who have to use them. In this concept, a person's bare life, that's a Agamben term, is altogether controlled by the operations of biopolitical power. In this movie, we meet a couple whose lives are captive in a society that demands their full participation, body and soul. So controlled by impossible things like financing that never goes right and other corporate demands in a late capitalist megacity. The male character resorts to a suicide attempt by jumping off one of the city's many freeway bridges. The female character resorts instead to isolating herself in her bedroom, which is crammed with hoarded survival junk food, and garbage. Both existences are abject in their impossible isolation, as well as the garbage. There's garbage everywhere in this movie. The suicide attempt is curtailed by the presence of an uninhabited island underneath the bridge, where one of the piles supporting the bridge structure is located. So the character Kim Seong-gun is a castaway living an island existence where he's forced to learn a kind of bare life survival. And through the course of the movie, Song-gun manages to cultivate corn, which he eventually uses to create a meal inspired by a picture on an instant noodle package and that he found in the garbage. And the female character, Kim Jun-young, finds Songgun in the viewfinder of her zoom lens, which she uses to look out of her bedroom window once or twice a year. But inspired by what she sees in Songgun's world, Junyoung initiates an improbable communication with him using messages in bottles which she throws from the bridge. Songgun is also inspired to garden herself. The process requires that she make rare contact with her family in order to get supplies to grow the corn in abandoned food cans that she has lying around. The movie is only futuristic in its speculation. It asks, could we survive in the urban spaces in which human bodies are barred? And can gardening save us from the isolation that's forced upon us through inhospitable urban planning and our constant online simulations? Like all of us during the COVID pandemic, Junyoung is living her life in front of a screen. Her use of online shopping and social media has replaced life outside of her bedroom. So in their abject lives, both characters discover the miracle of germination. The seeds that will eventually feed their bodies immediately fill them with wonder and motivate them to finally seek out human contact. The movie situates gardening as a lingering possibility and hope despite urban life's conditions. So these days I'm thinking about Castaway on the Moon as I see evidence of people spending more time gardening while housebound. When I see these gardens on my walks around the neighborhood, I really hope that the time people have this year to spend in their own urban spaces has caused them to reflect on the way things grow and how they access food in their own environment. I hope they'll continue these practices, and through them, I hope that it has inspired some optimism and wonder, especially as we all live out the pandemic in confined isolation. And
Thank you, Lois.
you're welcome. Oh, good, I'm back. I just wanted to show you the books. Okay, this is the Dandelion, the little German book, and this is the Seed Broadcast Journal, which you can see online, and you could probably access if you're in touch with them.
Fantastic. Thank you for all those wonderful images and lots to think about there. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lois. Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen here too. Screen. Come on, screen. Oops, oops, oops. I'm sharing my screen. Here we go, and I'm going to put the slideshow right there. All right, so it probably will take a couple seconds to kick in. I am Lori Weidenhammer. I'm a performance-based interdisciplinary artist and educator, and I'm originally from a very tiny, tiny hamlet called Cactus Lake, Saskatchewan. And I work with all ages of people from preschool to seniors, teaching them about food security, gardening, and bees, because I'm in love with bees and I like to talk to bees. And for many years, I've performed as a persona called Madame Bee Speaker, who asks people to write messages for the bees and to start conversations with bees. I'm originally from what is Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan. It's the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and it's also the home of the Métis Nation. And I feel grateful to be able to work here on the land of the Coast Salish nations. So My mom is the younger of the two women here, and she's sitting on some potatoes. And so this was probably in the 1940s in Bounty, Saskatchewan, which is the little town where she grew up, which is near Outlook, Saskatchewan. And it's interesting that Bounty actually was supposed to be called Botany because there were some beautiful prairie lilies that people noticed as they were naming the towns. But someone didn't think that that was a good enough name, so they crossed it out and they wrote Bounty instead. So Botany, Bounty. They're still both beautiful names. So, and this mountain of potatoes here reminds me that when I was growing up, we actually grew a garden that just had potatoes in it. It was a total monoculture. My mom's garden was beautiful. Was diverse, but once in a while we would just grow a garden full of potatoes. And it occurs to me now that we probably didn't eat all those potatoes, but we actually shared them with other people. And so other families sometimes would do the same thing. They would grow a garden of potatoes and then we would get some of those potatoes. And so I was thinking about that and how I really hated the potato garden because it was so boring and there was so much drudgery involved in it. And so to me, it was sort of demarcated the line between gardening, which was fun, and farming, which was hard work. All right. This is my mom's dad, who was a farmer and a beekeeper, and apparently a naturalist. He loved nature and he would make sure that he planted all kinds of habitat for birds and bees and pronghorn. He was really a wonderful teacher for my mom, and she taught love of nature to me. Here's another garden, which is probably even the 1920s, which is also near Cactus Lake. I grew up in a rural community that was a lot of the people call themselves German Russians. They were some of the first immigrants that came to Canada in the 1800s. And everybody had a garden. I mean, it wasn't a question. You had to grow your own food, and everybody was good at it. I never heard of anyone who was good at gardening or cooking. Everybody just had to do it. And so I love this picture, which also has a bit of the drudgery of having cucumbers for miles, but also there's this kind of romance in that this lovely woman in her flapper dress is kind of posing by the cucumbers. So I remember this family is a friend of the family, the Wyrecks, and they were very good at gardening. And their gardens were not just utilitarian, but also often had flowers and were quite enchanting. And so a lot of the gardens that I grew up with were very utilitarian, but there were always certain gardens that had a little bit more of the romance in them. And I grew up surrounded literally by wheat fields, canola fields, all kinds of things. So I also I knew about not only the drudgery of farming, but also the risk. There was the drought, grasshoppers, all the diseases that could happen to crops. So I grew up knowing that it wasn't an easy way to make a living. I also grew up near pasture and tiny pieces of native prairie where we always went out to look for the crocuses early in the spring with the family. That's one of my earliest memories, looking for the crocuses, pussy willows, all those kinds of things. And so there was also that ecosystem that was around the town where I lived. And then again, there were gardens. So the vegetables that Mom grew were the staples. Always radishes in the cold frame because we had to get out there and garden. And my mom was so itching to get gardening by the spring that she had to build this cold frame to get the radishes and some salad in there. Cucumbers, corn, potatoes, all, the things that people grow. And in terms of herbs, there was always a row of dill because dill was such a staple in our house, pickles and pierogies and all kinds of things. Green onions, borage, calendula, all those things were in the garden as well. What's happening? There we go. And so here's my mom. Oops. bounty up from her garden. So this was in late summer, and you can see there's like beautiful beans and beets and potatoes and all the gorgeous foods that came from the garden. So we always loved visiting mom and dad at that time of the year, and mom always made fantastic food, home cooked meals from the garden, and nothing bought from the store could compare really. So we got spoiled, and we knew what good food tasted like. But my mom also grew beautiful flowers. There were always rows of glads and sweet peas like Lois was growing, and hollyhocks. And there's my dad enjoying the flowers as well. And even you can see the tea set that my mom had the birch tree pattern on it, and there was a lot of florals in our house. So we were kind of a flower crazy household. And there's mom's sunflower forest, part of which grew over the septic tank, which, like Irma Bombeck says, makes everything grow a little bit taller. And some of the last times I visited the garden, because we don't own the property anymore, I saw some really cool bees in the calendula, this cuckoo bee, longhorn bees, this another beautiful longhorn bee. And my mom's garden had actually quite a biodiversity of critters in it, so it was pretty impressive. And a little jewel wasp in the calendula. Calendula is one of the greatest things you can plant. It's so easy. People can grow it from seed, and it actually attracts a lot of insects. In terms of permaculture, we had rhubarb and crab apples, and that was about it. There wasn't a lot. Like, everything grew from seed, which is why I love growing things from seed. It's such a miracle to see things growing in that short growing season, just like getting out there and then having that beautiful bounty by August. It always seemed like a bit of a miracle to me. And then I moved here to this beautiful land of gardening, which I love, and we have this backyard. And of course, when our child was younger, we had a lawn, and we had lots of kids hanging out on the lawn, birthday parties, all kinds of things, which was great for that period. There was a permaculture border around it with, not permaculture, but perennial, with rhodos, lilacs, and roses, lots of beautiful roses. And then I decided to rip up the lawn and rewild as much of the garden as I could. So when I sit in my chair, my anti-gravity chair, I'm looking at these wild black-cap raspberries and these salmon berries. And it makes me really happy to be able to look at this kind of wild green jungle in my backyard. And of course, I love to eat. So the salmon berries are one of my favorite, and they're just coming on now. So bumblebees love them. Of course, the queens come out, and the queen bumblebees come out, and they really own those blossoms. They love those blossoms, and it fruits and it flowers at the same time, which means that the bees get kind of continual supply of nectar and pollen. And there we go. That was my breakfast yesterday. Lots of yummy, yummy berries on my cake. And I also have a small raised bed, which I love. I love my little raised bed. It's not big, but it's got all sorts of cool things in it, including these little white strawberries, which are called pineapple strawberries. They never actually turn red. They're white, and they taste really tropical. They're really fruity. And I noticed that these little blue, they're not the blue orchard mason bee. They're just a tiny blue mason bee. I call them chewy because they chew up the leaves and put them in their nests. They actually pollinate my strawberries and my black-cap raspberries, and those raspberries, the other raspberries, are from Catherine, so they're directly from her garden. And this is the kind of thing that I like to have, is edible flowers, lettuce from the garden, to make meals not just tasty, but really appetizing and beautiful. So that's kind of my goal for having a garden. And in terms of looking towards the future, I am really inspired by Victory Gardens and what people are doing now in their front lawns, and have been doing for a number of years, which is why I wrote the book Victory Gardens for Bees, and making it a contemporary thing where you have a pollinator border, but you also can grow food plants at the same time. And I think a really good model for the future is Farmers on 57th. And so they work at a place which is the Pearson building, and they actually literally grow food on the lawns, and they have CSAs, and they have flower CSAs, and it's a beautiful model for what could be in Vancouver. Another model that I really like is the Norquay Learning Orchard, and this is actually Laurie Schneider teaching. There's a lot of native plants in this really small little lot, and it's just verdant and green. It's an outdoor classroom. It's a fantastic, it's really beautiful part of Vancouver. It's one of the only places that I've seen a cuckoo bumblebee. And when I was out there with Lori, we were looking at the Nootka roses, and this cuckoo bumblebee came in, and I was like, whoa, this is really exciting. So when you have that kind of, those key native plants in the space, it attracts so much diversity, and it just creates this beautiful grounded space. And another model that I was working on is the Riley Park Community Garden, which we've tried to make as an accessible community garden, so everybody can have a chance to do work parties and to find out how to grow a lot of native plants and cultivars and work together. And we're growing pollinator plants for the David Suzuki Butterfly Way. And there's signage which educates people as they come into the garden, talk to them what's going on. I think this is the new model. This is what we really need to do in Vancouver, is get everybody involved. And the other day I saw another beautiful cuckoo bee. Cuckoo bees are a sign of diversity, which was why I'm a bit cuckoo about them. And this was actually in the leopard's vein in the Riley Park Community Garden. So I've been going up to Queen Elizabeth Park a lot lately during this crisis. I've been gardening myself and getting plants into the ground because it's really helping me cope with the stress. But I've also been walking up to Queen Elizabeth for exercise, relief of stress, and just to kind of, for some equilibrium. And they're actually putting these bumblebee boxes out, which is fantastic. It's an experiment from SFU, and they're trying to get some bumblebees to nest in there. And this is an example of a really nice planting where you've got these beautiful purple alliums in front, and then the Diablo 9-bark, which is just starting to bloom, and it's just totally bringing in the bees. So there are parts of this park that I really like, and there's parts of this park that really give me a depressed feeling because it's like the person who planted this garden hates native plants. And the cultivars are so boring. Oh, this was from my garden. Sorry, this is going back. I put this in the wrong order. This is actually a lupin from Lois, from her seed project when we were doing the traffic control. So this is back to Queenie Park. There's a rose garden. It's okay. There's some pollinator plants in it, as you can see, these alliums. But there's the gardener is sneaking in some native plants. There's some camas here. It's a cultivar, but it is camas, which is really exciting. And then I found this tiny corner which had some native blackberry in it and this moss and some sedum, and it was covered with bees. And I got so excited because I just felt like this is what Queen Elizabeth could be again. And it gave me a vision of what it was in the past and what it could be in the future. And so then I was there yesterday and I found another corner, which was literally, I think, some gardener's garbage pile. Like they were like, oh, these are native plants. Let's just chuck them all over in this garbage pile. And they're just so beautiful. There's this bald hip rose, which I rarely see bees in it, but it was full of bees and I was really excited about that. There was Oregon grape. There was a little vine maple growing up from this garbage pile. There was salal, and it was all in this tangled mess that someone had literally thrown in the corner. And I was in heaven. Absolutely loved it. And it just gave me this sense that there is hope for this city, that we can go back to valuing what needs to be valued, which is plants that feed and nurture people and all the critters that we need on this earth. And so this is my little friend, my little Andrina bee, peeking out from one of the trailing blackberry blossoms. And her message to me is, that pitch and putt, it's got to go. We've got to start a community garden in there. We've got to replant that whole hill and base it on this little garbage pile of the forgotten plants, because that's where hope lies. It's the old way that needs to become new again. All right. And now, how do I get back? And if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the side. You could type it in the side, or you could put your video on and raise your hand. And I'm going to pass it over to Elisa. And I know Elisa also has some questions, so maybe she can get us started.
Hi, Lori. Thanks for that. That was amazing.
I have a question.
Oh, Frederick, go for it.
How are you supposed to start a community garden when you live in a little apartment in Vancouver? How are you supposed to start your own little garden when you live in a little apartment in Vancouver where there's not much space for humans?
I think that's part of why we need the collective community gardens, is that's because it's specifically for people who cannot garden at home. So if you could go to your local park and garden, and that garden was for the people that lived within walking distance, then that would be the solution for you, because that's the problem, is that a lot of people, because of densification, are living in apartments and they don't have that opportunity. And in a weird way, what's also happening is that in the city, we're so cramped that they're literally putting housing, temporary housing, on community gardens, which I think is a really bad move. We have to have both. We have to have gardens and we have to have housing. So how are we going to do that? That's a really good question. But you know, when I go up to Queenie, I see a lot of lawn that's not being used. Hello, Pitch and Putt. Hello, Langara Golf Course. I'm sorry, but I think that the golf course is going to have to go. We pride ourselves on having these beautiful parks like, you know, Stanley Park and everything like that, but we need our micro parks. We need like these small lots that are actually community gardens so that everyone can have access to green space and to growing things.
I often find a community garden near me and apply to it or whatever. Do you have to apply or you have to pay money to garden in it, or how does it work? I've never been a member of a community garden.
That's right. There's a waiting list. So, but sometimes organizations themselves create community gardens. So if there's like a food security place around you, like a community center, they might create a community garden and then invite you to be on an active participant. The old method was that people paid $30 and then they got a plot of land to work in, but we're trying to make it so that it's more accessible so anyone can just show up at a work party and start working. So it depends on what kind of garden is close to you.
I'll just have to research it myself.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
All right, I'll hand it over to you, Lisa.
There we go. There seems to be a strong sense of nurturing, tending, and caring when you guys all talk about the gardens that you have known or have created in your lives. Do you feel that you bring that same kind of approach or methodology to your art practices or your creative practices?
I'll start off and I'll say that what's interesting is that I actually dreamt about gardening last night. And I dreamt that my partner had hired someone to till a giant garden for me. And I put my hands in the soil and it was soft and fertile. And it was just like this feeling of incredible joy and hope. And that I think that nurturing feeling and of being able to plant seeds is a huge metaphor in my life and in my art practice. And so I think I always talk about how I want my practice to grow organically. So I want things to be able to grow naturally. So my practice has blossomed, and it gets weedy, and it's all those things. How about anyone else want to chime in there? Any of the other artists?
I think I think the food production, gardening metaphor, or yeah, the nurturing that's required in those kinds of parts of our lives. I think that's really um, part of the practice of being an artist too. Like, I think it's really important to, or I often think about it when what comes to mind a lot is making soup. I make soup when I'm gardening because, you know, you've got to kind of think about a really rich blend of nutrients in the soil. So you have to kind of figure out where those nutrients are going to come from or what has produced them, what to put nearby to make it happen. And then I think about soup when I'm putting together art projects. Like, I guess it's this amalgam of many, many different things, and you've got to let go this idea that it's all going to be the perfect ratios of different ingredients. You have to be more intuitive and nurturing, like you say, Elisa. And then soup, you make soup to feed people, and that's another part of art, that it is directed to an audience of a kind or participants who come to it and who get something out of it. So it's highly relational.
I love it. Catherine, do you want to chime in, or Lori? No.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I was waiting for Catherine. Um, I just, I just kind of wanted to just address Patrick's question. You know, Patrick, I just chatted with a young man who is really interested in growing food, and he lives in an older home with 3 apartments. And I said, well, I'd be interested in chatting with your landlady and us having a conversation why this is so important. And, you know, if I could help her to realize that, one, and two, that it's like, you know, approaching her to let her know that, hey, what kind of food can I grow for you? And you know, that we really need to think about this food security. And if people have time, the inkling, the love, the curiosity, then how can we hopefully, the ones who are, you know, still holding the land, recognize that this is important, really important in this time, to really think about our future here. And just, you know, I don't know exactly how this is kind of related, but, you know, I started Instagram not too long ago, a couple years ago, and I haven't been incredibly active on it. And the other day I walked down the back alleys. This is what I'm loving, you know, so many of us were moving and moving our bodies. And, you know, people had been complaining they couldn't go to the parks. And I was like, well, just walk your neighborhood, like get to know hopefully your neighbors, but also just see what's happening, and you know, that creativity that you know, is being expressed as people are planting. So I took about 5 images of back alley gardens. I could probably actually show you, and it's the most response that I have gotten on my Instagram. And since I started Instagram maybe 2 years ago, and I thought, wow, this is really, really inspiring. So, you know, to Frederick, I feel that the conversation can be easier with landowners you know, in apartment buildings and complexes and such. That, you know, I often look at the churches in my neighborhood or even some of the commercial, you know, buildings. And I think, wow, we could really grow some beautiful food here. The Molson Canadian Brewery, they've got some native plants there, not right on Burrard, but on the side street. I think it's East or West 2nd. And I was like, wow, this could be emulated over and over again. And one last thing I just quickly wanted to mention is the neighbor across the street from that bench that I dug out with the help of many hands. He saw me earlier in the spring digging up and planting the radishes and such. And now he's dug up his lawn and he has started his garden. So I think this conversation is so timely and exciting. And what would be great is to, you know, if any of the callers, have they started growing food or are they having those conversations to see where that's where we could go, if I could say that, add that in.
Thanks, Lori. That's awesome. That's really hopeful too. I think it's true. We've got to start some grassroots organizing and just get going on it. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Monique?
Lori, I've got a question here from Monique.
Yeah.
She says, won't it be wonderful when we've got all sorts of veg patches all around the city? I've started growing food in my little apartment. I guess not a question.
I know it's lovely, and I know I follow Monique on Instagram, and she's been growing corn shoots, little corn, greens, which I never would have thought of for eating. But you can, just like any kind of sprout, you can grow. I've grown sunflowers, I've grown peas, but I've never grown corn. And apparently it's really tasty. So I love that idea. So there's a lot of creativity happening on, if you look around at different people's posts that they're doing. And some people are regrowing their kitchen scraps. I don't know if you've seen that movement, whole thing where you can, you know, you put part of the vegetable back in the ground and your green onions will start growing. And so people are doing that too, which is growing. It's all growing, which is great. Anyone else want to chime in?
I'll just, Lori,
Yeah.
you can hear me? I've been making garbage soup with my all my clippings from, you know, when I'm cooking, and I save it and I make a soup stock, and it's really been working. It's really tasty. And I was telling a friend of mine who's from a Mennonite background about it, because she wanted to do it. And she said, oh yeah, I learned that from my mom and she learned it from her grandmother. So I was just thinking Lois and her background, how it comes down the line.
You told me that, and then the next time I cooked potatoes, I kept the potato water and used it as stock, because it's right. We should be really not only using vegetables from nose to tail, as they say, but also using that water that we've cooked potatoes in to then, you know, make stock.
Also, I haven't done it yet, but I think that if you did that, but you didn't want to use it as a soup stock, I think you could dilute it and use it to feed your plants as well. Why not? It's got nutrients.
Yeah, good point. Sounds great. Awesome.
Lori, I've got another follow-up question from Monique. She says, where would our collective energy be best spent to bring about a civic revolution? The Parks Board, City Council?
That's a really good question. I think both. I think that the momentum can happen from both. I really I love that initiative that they had during the Olympics, which was to have 2010 gardens in 2010. But since then, like I said, they've been sort of taking them away and putting housing on them. So I think we need to use this crisis on all levels, grassroots, up to the very highest to change things. So we've really got to do it. How we're going to do, what's that going to look like? Maybe that's conversation. All right. Anyone else want to chime in? Thanks, Monique.
Hi,
All
this
right.
is Monique.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to say I'm so inspired. And Laurie, Lois, and Catherine, your passion is amazing. I'm just not going to give up on anything now, like after this. And I'm just hoping that a meeting like this tonight, if we can actually make it into a regular meeting, like not, it doesn't have to be a weekly thing, but even if we have a monthly thing or every 3 weeks, especially for the coming months when all the flowers, all the food gardens are growing so vibrantly. There's so many questions that will pop up, and also this movement of making this change. I think it's about time. And yeah, just wanted to let everyone know that one of the volunteers, one of our butterfly rangers, Patrick, he's actually growing potatoes. And so I saw these like really cool potato bags. So it's not like the picture that you showed us, which was wonderful. I was trying to figure out what that was that your mother was setting up. It's amazing. Yeah, but then potatoes can also be grown in these very cool little, like these bags, these black bags. Yeah, so we'll be sharing photos later with our group as well. But I'm truly hoping that a meeting like this, if we could meet up regularly and we can all be inspired and energized to share some of your passion.
Let's do it. That sounds great. And there's actually a program in the elementary schools. I don't know if you know this, Winnie, but it's called Spuds in Tubs. And they actually have a really early growing potato that matures, before the school year's out. And they have them in tubs, and the schools can plant them. So, planting potatoes actually is a good childhood thing to start at. You figure out, where your food comes from pretty fast.
Amazing. That is great. And I want to
Yeah.
ask if I can come with you when next time you go to Queen Elizabeth.
Of course.
I'll come with you.
Sounds great. That sounds like a plan.
Okay.
I also forgot to tell a story. Maybe we can, well, we'll see if anyone has any more things. But we were picking tomatoes once with my family in Mom's garden, and my dad threw a rotten tomato at me. And it was so shocking. It seemed so out of character for my father to do that. But I love that it was this moment that my dad kind of became a boy again. And something about working in the garden made him do this cheeky thing of throwing a rotten tomato at me. And it's a good reminder not to take ourselves so seriously, and that gardens are fun and they are life-giving, and they give us all the feels. So, anyone else want to chime in on that note with some feels? Going once, going twice. Okay, I think that's us for tonight. We've had a great meeting. I'm very grateful for everyone's contributions. I hope everyone gardens their pants off. So take good care of each other, take care of yourselves, and take care of your garden. Nurture nature. Take care.
Sweet dreams, everyone. Thanks so much, Lori.
Bye.
Thank you to
Thank you.
Richmond.
Night. Lisa, hasta mañana.
Mañana.
Thank you.
You. Bye.
That you were here,
Bye.
Winnie. Serena, good that you made it. Yay.
Woohoo!
Well done.
Yay! Woo! We did it!
Okay.
Okay. Everybody.
Good night.
Night.